Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, June 30th, 2025. I'm Gary Starkoff. Thank you for joining us. The Senate's vote-a-rama continues this afternoon as members offer and vote on amendments to the Republicans' tax cuts and spending bill. But passage of the bill isn't a sure thing. Republicans Rand Paul of Kentucky and Thom Tillis of North Carolina have both said they're voting no, while Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska haven't said how they'll vote. Congressional Republicans and President Trump have said they want a bill passed and signed into law by July 4th. Now, last night on the floor, Senator Tillis criticized both the bill's Medicaid cuts and the president for breaking a campaign promise to not interfere with Medicaid benefits. That prompted responses from the president on social media, including one announcing he would back a primary challenge against the senator. Not long after, Senator Tillis announced he would not seek re-election next year. We'll hear what he said on the Senate floor and his statement on his decision coming up. And a federal appeals court heard arguments today on the president's use of the Alien Enemies Act. That's the centuries-old wartime law the White House has used to deport hundreds of Venezuelan migrants to a prison in El Salvador. Lawyers for the American Civil Liberties Union say the Trump administration is unlawfully using the law to take away due process for possible deportees. The administration maintains that a Venezuelan gang is carrying out an invasion of the U.S. at the direction of the regime of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. We'll hear from the oral argument coming up. The Senate's vote-a-rama started this morning. Both leaders spoke on the floor. Here's Senator Thune.
So, Mr. President, it's time to vote. And Democrats will get a chance. They'll offer all their amendments, and they'll attack this thing as cutting taxes for billionaires. What we are doing here is extending tax relief for the American people, keeping their rates low, making sure they don't have their child tax credit cut in half, their standard deduction cut in half, including new provisions that provide more relief for working Americans, which is what President Trump campaigned on. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, lower taxes for seniors, for Social Security recipients. These are all targeted at working Americans, working families. That is first and foremost about what this is about. This, Mr. President, will make this country safer, stronger, and more prosperous. It addresses military modernization. It addresses securing our border. It addresses restoring energy dominance. It extends tax relief for the American people so they can avoid a $4 trillion tax increase at the end of the year. And yes, it includes some savings associated with reforms that are made in a way that targets assistance from federal programs to where it was intended to go. And yes, we have work requirements that were initiated by Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration during welfare reform back in the 1990s. Only, I would say again, they're not as strong. The work requirements included in that legislation back in the 1990s, what we have in this bill, the work requirements here, are not as strong. Mr. President, let's vote. This is good for America. This is good for the American people. It's good for working families. And it's been a long debate. I know people are weary. But at the end of the day, we want to get this done so that this country is safer and stronger and more prosperous, not only for today, but for future generations of Americans.
Senate Republican leader John Thune. And from Politico, dozens of House Republicans are scrambling behind the scenes to head off the deep Medicaid cuts in the Senate version of the party line mega bill. Group texts are blowing up and frantic phone calls are being exchanged among GOP lawmakers alarmed about the Senate Medicaid provisions. That's according to 6 House Republicans granted anonymity by Politico to describe the conversations. Politico goes on to write, quote, even some conservatives in states that will be hit hard by the Senate's crackdown on state-directed payments and medical provider taxes don't want to vote on the Senate's Medicaid text. Speaker Mike Johnson is expected to hold a call with House Republicans this afternoon. That's also according to 2 other people granted anonymity by Politico. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer also spoke on the floor during leader time.
Mr. President, today, Senate Republicans have to decide: choose the American people or bow down to Donald Trump and his coterie of billionaires. Because this bill, as we have said for months, steals people's health care, jacks up their electricity bill, takes away their jobs, all to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. All month, can we have order, Mr. President? All month, Senate Democrats have put this bill on trial in the court of public opinion. We've exposed how it steals Medicaid from more than 16 million Americans. We've exposed how it takes away food benefits from millions of hungry kids. We've exposed how this bill increases the debt by $3.5 trillion to bankroll billionaire tax breaks. We've shown how this bill increases the debt $1 trillion more than the House bill. We've shown how this bill cuts Medicaid even more than the House bill. We've shown how this bill kills climate jobs even more than the House bill. With every rewrite, Senate Republicans have made their bill more extreme, pro-billionaire, and more hostile to people's health care and livelihood. Why do they do that? There's a small group on that side of the aisle, MAGA hard right-wingers, who are dictating what's happened, and all the rest of the senators on the Republican side who know it's wrong go along. A small group. They don't represent more than 10% of the American people, but they're dictating what this body does. A, because of the rules we have, a simple majority, but B, because our colleagues on the Republican side lack the courage of their convictions to do the right thing for the American people. It's outrageous. Cutting people's health care, causing people to get sicker and to even die. Cutting people's health care so that it's certain almost that more people will die. Just to give tax breaks to billionaires.
Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer. And as we said, Republicans can lose no more than 3 votes. 2 of those no votes are already spoken for, Thom Tillis of North Carolina and Rand Paul of Kentucky. 2 other Republicans, Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who both voted to advance the bill on Saturday, haven't said how they will ultimately vote. Washington Post congressional reporter Paul Kane saying on social media the Senate has knocked out 11 votes in 5 hours. A 40 roll call vote-a-rama would be about expected, and at this rate, that would take almost 20 hours total, which sets up a 5:30 a.m. Tuesday final vote. Now, should the bill pass the Senate, it will need to go back to the House so they can approve the changes. The Hill's Michael Schnell reports the bill would first go to the House Rules Committee. GOP leaders said the first votes could happen on Wednesday morning. Now, more on Senator Tillis's opposition. Here's what he had to say on the floor yesterday.
In the White House, senators advising the president are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. And you know the last time I saw a promise broken around health care, with respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, it's when somebody said, if you like your health care, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We found out that wasn't true. That made me the second Republican Speaker of the House since the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, because we betrayed the promise to the American people. 2 years later, 3 years later, it actually made me a U.S. Senator, because in 2010, it had just been proposed. And just anticipation of what was going to happen was enough to have a sea change election that swept Republicans into the majority for the second time in 100 years. Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room when I was there with finance, where he said we can go after waste, fraud, and abuse on any programs. Now, those amateurs that are advising him, not Dr. Oz, I'm talking about White House healthcare experts, refuse to tell him that those instructions that were to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse all of a sudden eliminates a government program that's called the provider tax. We have morphed a legal construct that admittedly has been abused and should be eliminated into waste, fraud, and abuse. Money laundering. Read the code. Look at how long it's been there. I was Speaker of the House. I refused to do it. When I left North Carolina, I said, we're not going to do a provider tax. I left it at 2.5%. Now it's 6%. Mistake on the part of the leadership. And frankly, I know my friends are probably going to think I'm a little bit crazy here, but I actually passed a law that made it illegal to expand Medicaid. Why did I do that? Because I was convinced someday we would be here. And I would have rather found a way to get more people on Medicaid at the standard FMAP than having this 90-10 match and watching it disappear and taking away desperately needed health care.
After Senator Tillis voted against advancing the bill on Saturday night, President Trump attacked him in a series of social media posts that included one that promised to support a primary challenger against Senator Tillis in next year's midterms. That was followed by Senator Tillis' announcement that he will not run for re-election next year. And from NBC News, the surprise decision opens up a seat in battleground North Carolina that was already set to be one of the most hotly contested races of the 2026 midterms. Senator Tillis put out a statement about his decision, saying, quote, "As many of my colleagues have noticed over the last year and at times even joked about, I haven't exactly been excited about running for another term. That is true since the choices between spending another 6 years navigating the political theater and partisan gridlock in Washington, or spending that time with the love of my life, Susan, our 2 children, 3 beautiful grandchildren, and the rest of our extended family back home. It's not a hard choice, and I will not be seeking re-election." Now, here's what he had to say about the decision to News Nation's Hannah Brandt.
Was it because of President Trump's truths that you dropped out?
No, I'd already told the president that he needed to start looking for replacements before that came out.
What are you going to do to stop this bill?
I'm just working on the only thing I'm doing. I've done what I'm going to do. I've told my staff I've rested my case. The fiscal research is out there. I'll leave it to the members of the House to decide how to act on it.
But what's your message to North Carolinians if this is going to hurt so many of them?
Well, my message is clear. Just read the analysis. It's $26 billion over 10 years.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell called Senator Tillis, quote, "one of the most effective and collegial members that I have ever served with the United States Senate. His announcement is a big setback for the Senate and the Republican conference. I want to thank him for his service in this institution representing the people of North Carolina and our nation." And this from Notice political reporter Reese Gorman. Presidential daughter-in-law Lara Trump is seriously considering a bid for North Carolina Senate, per a source. She previously served as Republican National Committee co-chair. And just what role is the White House playing in getting the Republicans' bills passed? Here's Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Well, look, we are very well aware, the president is very well aware, that this bill needs to not only pass out of the Senate, but it needs to go back to the House. And we need the full weight of the Republican conference to get behind this bill. And we expect them to, and we are confident that they will. The president has been working hand in hand with Senate Majority Leader Thune and also our House Republican leader, or the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, both of whom will be at the White House today to meet with the president yet again. I believe they were here this morning, actually.
White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett was asked what he would say to Republicans who are still on the fence about the bill.
If you look at this bill, it's the biggest spending cut in history. It's the biggest tax cut in history. If we don't pass the bill, then we're going to go almost immediately into a recession. It also secures the border. It achieves all sorts of objectives that the president talked about on the campaign. And so I would counsel very much against voting against the bill. And I don't expect that they're going to even do that because the bill makes so much sense.
Now you can watch our live coverage as the Senate continues its consideration of the Republicans' tax and spending bill live on C-SPAN 2, and you can get our full coverage at C-SPAN Now and at cspan.org. Also today, at the top of today's White House briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt showed off a note President Trump has sent to Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The note criticizes the Fed chair for not making more cuts to interest rates.
And with the incoming Trump economic boom, the stock market continues to roar back, with the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both hitting record highs. And on this point of an economic boom, I bring to you original correspondence from the President of the United States to our Fed chair, Jerome Powell. As the president has consistently stated, the American economy is booming. And there were so many economic analysts who said that this president's policies would drive our economy down, when in fact we have seen the opposite. We've seen a massive deregulation campaign take place. We've seen inflation completely diminished from where it was under the reckless spending and the bad policies of the previous incompetent administration. I would remind the Fed chair, and I would remind the entire world, that this is a president who was a businessman first, and he knows what he is doing. He has a proven economic formula that worked in his first term as president, and it is working again. The one problem that remains is high interest rates for the American people. The American people want to borrow money cheaply, and they should be able to do that. But unfortunately, we have interest rates that are still too high. So the president sent this note to the Fed chair today. And if you look at this chart, this is a chart of all of the interest rates of many countries throughout the world. At the top is Switzerland. They're only paying a quarter for interest rates. Cambodia, Japan, Denmark, Thailand, Botswana, Barbados, Taiwan, Bulgaria, Cuba, Sweden, Morocco, Cabo Verde, South Korea, Algeria, Canada, Albania, Libya, Malaysia, China, New Zealand, Trinidad and Tobago, Czechia, Bolivia, Australia, Costa Rica, the Bahamas, Kuwait, Papua New Guinea, Bosnia, United Kingdom, and the UAE are all paying lower interest rates than the United States of America, which has one of the hottest and strongest economies in the world. The president sent this note to the Fed chair. It says, Jerome, you are as usual too late. You have cost the USA a fortune and continue to do so. You should lower the rate by a lot. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being lost, and there is no inflation. And the president is right. There is historically low inflation thanks to his policies.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. TheHill.com noting in an article today that Federal Reserve officials began the year expecting to continue cutting interest rates as inflation drifted back toward its ideal annual level of 2%. But the bank has held off through the first half of 2025 amid the uncertainty driven by President Trump's tariff plans. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell reiterated his call for patience on Wednesday last week after the Fed kept rates steady once again. That from TheHill.com. Now, to today's Fifth Circuit oral arguments. From the Washington Post, one of the most conservative federal appeals courts in the nation will weigh on Monday whether President Donald Trump has lawfully invoked a centuries-old wartime law to deport hundreds of Venezuelan migrants to a notorious gang prison in El Salvador. Legal observers see the case set for argument before a panel of judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit as the most likely of several Alien Enemies Act lawsuits to land at the Supreme Court. Now, from today's oral argument and speaking for the plaintiffs, ACLU attorney Lee Gellert answering a question from Judge Leslie Southwick.
It does seem to me, when I talk about what the elements are, you said it needs to be military. Well, here the president is proclaiming that you have directed by, interwoven with the Venezuelan unrecognized government by us, these terrorists. And they're undermining really civil society here by their actions. It may not be preparatory to an invasion, but it is having the kinds of effects within the cities in which they're operating, the areas in which they're operating, that sort of preparation for an invasion might have. I mean, I'm having a hard time drawing the line.
Yeah.
Why this sort of, if it is government or nation directed, and you're going to tell me why it's not, but nonetheless not yet, why wouldn't this be similar to what privateers are doing, what Indian tribes are doing, which is a temporary incursion into some area, causing damage, escaping back out, except here that these are staying in place, unfortunately?
Yes. So the founders were concerned with large-scale activity. This is sort of isolated crimes, and even the government is...
Well, the Indian tribes' temporary raids were not...
Well, I think the evidence shows that Indian tribes, when they operated in large-scale forces, were treated as incursions. The only reason that we didn't invoke the alien enemies, or felt we couldn't, assuming we even wanted to, was because they weren't a sovereign nation. And the privateers were officially a part of another government. So I don't think that the founders were looking at subtle ideas. I mean, that's what the Alien Friends Act was exactly about. There are dangerous people coming to our country, often in secret machinations, clandestine, and that's what this was about war. And the reason we know that is because of the Alien Enemies Act framework. That framework could only be used when we were at war. And so this was solely about war and serious military conflict.
ACLU attorney Lee Gellert answering a question from Judge Leslie Southwick. On the Justice Department's side, Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign.
Plaintiffs appear to contend that because TDA members are only a subset of citizens of Venezuela, that the proclamation is somehow deficient. But that flies in the face of historical evidence and precedent. In the War of 1812, for example, the AEA was not invoked against all British subjects, but instead invoked only against those within 40 miles of the Tidewater. Similarly, President Wilson and President Roosevelt invoked the AEA against only subsets of citizens of Austria-Hungary and Germany, respectively, for World War I and World War II. And the D.C. Circuit has upheld those more limited invocations of the AEA as to only subsets of subjects of enemy nations, saying that it was that the proclamations there validly targeted, quote, less rather than greater in scope than the act. And we think similarly here, the president could validly determine to name only some subjects or citizens of Venezuela, mainly those that are TDA members, rather than all subjects or citizens of Venezuela. The government's revised notice policy also satisfies due process. The Supreme Court's decisions in JGG and AARP provide that AEA designees must receive, quote, or receive notice that they are subject to removal under the Act, end quote, that such notice, quote, must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such manner that will allow them to actually seek habeas relief, end quote. And to actually seek relief, a detainee must have sufficient time and information to reasonably be able to contact counsel, file a petition, and provide appropriate relief. The revised notice policy now does all of those things. Specifically informing aliens, they can challenge their AEA designations by filing a habeas petition in their districts of confinement. And it provides both a list of attorneys upon request and the ability to call them or family members who in turn could call those counsel by phone.
U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign. And more from the Washington Post. So far, most lower court judges to consider questions posed in the case, including ones in Texas, Colorado, and New York, have ruled against the administration while questioning the evidence of Tren de Agua, their alleged ties to Maduro's government, and noting that the U.S. is not at war with Venezuela. Two judges, one in Pennsylvania, the other in California, have backed the White House's use of the law, but said the Trump administration has failed to give targeted migrants enough time to challenge their removals. That from today's Washington Post. You can see the entire oral argument at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Time capsules. America is full of them. And for America 250, Congress has even created a new one. For this year's 4th of July holiday, C-SPAN's Podcast Weekly presents a time capsule of its own. The contents, what American presidents have said about time capsules or even put in time capsules. Like pictures of themselves. Which other presidents have included pictures of themselves in time capsules? And what else have they put in? Find out in C-SPAN's The Weekly. Because if you're celebrating the 4th of July and gearing up for America 250, you want to hear all about American history, the American presidency, and time capsules. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. From the Associated Press, state and federal prosecutors have charged more than 320 people and uncovered nearly $15 million in false claims in what they described as the largest coordinated takedown of healthcare fraud schemes in Justice Department history. Law enforcement seized more than $245 million in cash, luxury vehicles, cryptocurrency, and other assets as prosecutors warned of a growing push by transnational criminal networks to exploit the U.S. healthcare system. Here's Matthew Galliotti, Justice Department Criminal Division Head.
These criminals didn't just steal someone else's money. They stole from you. Every fraudulent claim, every fake billing, every kickback scheme represents money taken directly from the pockets of American taxpayers who fund these essential programs through their hard work and sacrifice. And when criminals defraud these programs, they're not just committing theft. They're driving up our national deficit and threatening the long-term viability of healthcare for seniors, disabled Americans, and our most vulnerable citizens. This enforcement action involves the seizure of cash, as well as luxury vehicles and properties, returning real money to American taxpayers and to our government healthcare programs. Second, we are seeing a disturbing trend of transnational criminal organizations engaging in increasingly sophisticated and complex criminal schemes that defraud the American healthcare system. As part of this takedown, we've identified and charged defendants operating from Russia, Eastern Europe, Pakistan, and other foreign countries. These individuals have infiltrated our healthcare system to steal American taxpayer dollars. As just one example, we dismantled a scheme involving a sophisticated operation run from Russia and Eastern Europe that strategically bought dozens of medical supply companies in the United States and submitted more than $10 billion in fraudulent healthcare claims to Medicare. To make matters worse, these perpetrators used the stolen identities of more than 1 million Americans spanning all 50 states to perpetrate this scheme and submit these false claims. But I'm pleased to report that federal agents intercepted and arrested key members of that organization at U.S. airports and the U.S.-Mexico border, cutting off their intended escape routes. The days of transnational criminal organizations using the American healthcare programs as their personal piggy bank are over.
Justice Department Attorney Matthew Gagliotti. The AP reporting that the alleged $14.6 billion in fraud is more than twice the Justice Department's previous record. Today's announcement features 190 federal cases and more than 90 state cases that have been charged or unsealed since June 9th. Nearly 100 licensed medical professionals were charged, including 25 doctors, and the government reported $2.9 billion in actual losses. You can see the entire Justice Department announcement at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The United Nations Security Council met for a briefing on the situation in Israel and Gaza today. During the meeting, Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon and Palestinian Deputy UN Ambassador Majed Bamia responded to each other's initial statements.
The representative of Palestine spoke for so long, but at your speech, you forgot to mention the responsibility of Hamas. Why are you afraid from Hamas? I will not answer all your lies. I will ask you one question. Can you agree with me and with my colleagues that there is no future for Gaza with Hamas in Gaza? Can you agree on this sentence, that the future of Gaza will not include Hamas? If you say yes, we can talk about everything. You blame us and we blame you. That's the core of the conflict. We don't want to destroy the Palestinian people. We are not fighting the Palestinian people. We are fighting Hamas, the terrorist organization who brought you to where you are today. So if you claim that you represent the Palestinian people, be responsible, be brave, and agree with me today that the future of Gaza will not include Hamas.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement, and the representative of the Observer State of Palestine has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and I give him the floor, and this will be our last statement in the meeting.
Thank you, Madam President. I wonder if this is not you attempting to destroy Palestine, what it is. We heard that you are taking all the precautions not to harm civilians. I can only imagine what it would be if you were not taking these precautions. You've asked, it so happens we're not in an Israeli interrogation or an Israeli jail. I have said, but you have decided not to hear, and I'm sorry, Madam President, to address the person directly since the representative of Israel addressed me. We have said that we do not accept and reject all attacks against civilians. We have said that we are willing to take our responsibilities in governance and security in Gaza tomorrow. Sole responsibility. That means there's no Hamas ruling in Gaza. That means there's no weapons there except in the hands of the Palestinian official government. We have a policy of one state, one law, one gun, one government. But you are undermining that Palestinian government who wants peace. You are preventing that from happening. The more we delay the ceasefire, the more killing there is. Instead of arriving to that solution proposed by Palestine, the region, and the world, to have a Palestinian government operating in Gaza with regional international support, with the deployment of forces upon our invitation. You are denying that state. And there's always a reason. It's Hamas, it's this, it's that, it's you didn't say this or you should do that. Look at everything we have done and everything we have said and tell me where Israel has done anything that matches the level of commitment we have shown.
Palestinian Deputy UN Ambassador Majed Bamia and Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon at the UN Security Council this morning. From the Associated Press, the Israeli military said yesterday that it has recovered the remains of 3 hostages held in Gaza, 21-year-old Yonatan Samarano, 19-year-old Shay Levinson, and 70-year-old Ofra Kedar. All 3 were killed in Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack. Hamas is still holding 50 hostages. Less than half of them are believed to be alive. Also today, the State Department has revoked the visas of members of the British punk rap group Bob Vylan after the group led on stage chants of death to the Israeli military at the Glastonbury Music Festival in the United Kingdom this past weekend. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau said in a social media post today, quote, "Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country." And a Colorado woman who was injured in that firebombing attack on demonstrators who were supporting Israeli hostages has died. According to a statement from the Boulder County, Colorado District Attorney's Office, Karen Diamond died as a result of the severe injuries that she suffered in the attack. She was 82 years old. The suspect in the June 1st attack, Mohammed Soliman, was indicted last week on 12 hate crime counts. And from KHQ.com in Spokane, Washington, investigators have confirmed the identity of a man found dead on Canfield Mountain outside Coeur d'Alene, Idaho yesterday. He is 20-year-old Wes Rowley, and he is believed to be the shooter involved in the deadly ambush on firefighters yesterday. Now, this morning, Idaho's Senators Mike Crapo and Jim Risch spoke about it on the floor.
The Senate has important work to accomplish today to prevent a more than $4 trillion tax hike on American workers and families, and we will accomplish that goal. However, while business continues here, life for the North Idaho community of Coeur d'Alene remains at a very painful standstill as we mourn the horrific loss of 2 firefighters. Yesterday afternoon, firefighters from Coeur d'Alene and Kootenai County were responding to a fire on Canfield Mountain. Upon arrival, they were ambushed by gunfire. 2 brave firefighters were murdered. Another has already undergone surgery for gunshot wounds. As we continue our work today, I ask my colleagues to join me in sending your prayers for that firefighter's full recovery, for the deceased victims, for their families, and for the entire North Idaho community grieving this heinous act. Senator Risch.
Thank you. Mr. President, fellow senators, while the Senate continues our important work to provide the American people with the largest tax cut in history today, we would be remiss if we did not pause for a moment and call attention to the tragic events that happened in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho yesterday. While responding to a fire, as my colleague indicated, 2 of North Idaho's brave firefighters were ambushed and murdered, and 1 is in serious to critical condition. This evil attack on the people who dedicate their lives to protecting and serving our communities is despicable, and it's not Idaho. I ask my Senate colleagues to join me, Senator Crapo, and all Idahoans in praying for the victims, their loved ones, and all who have been affected by this reprehensible act. Thank you, Mr. President.
Idaho Republicans Mike Crapo and Jim Risch on the Senate floor earlier today. And again, you can see our live coverage of the Senate as it continues work on the Republicans' tax and spending cuts bill on C-SPAN 2, cspan.org, and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, the Constitutional Accountability Center's Elizabeth Wydra and John Malcolm of the Heritage Foundation discuss key decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court. And then Aaron Harkey of Americans for the Arts on efforts by the Trump administration to cut federal funding of arts and culture programs. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.